Hello and welcome to the Ecom Sales Tax Podcast. My name is Ryan Johnson, and Paul, welcome back to our wonderful show. How are you doing this morning?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm doing great. Southern Utah, it's hot. I'm ready for the heat to be over with, but we're only in the middle of June. We got a couple more months to go.
You got a long time. You got into October.
Oh, don't remind me.
I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum where I'm like, no, I want the heat because there's only a short period of it. I'm in the 50s today. I don't necessarily like it.
I'm going to come visit you.
As you should, and we'll go fishing.
Yes.
So today, as I'm aware, today, Louisiana, or recently, enacted marketplace facilitator tax laws, which also includes the economic nexus laws and thresholds. You being in that world 24/7, I was hoping to get your feedback and why this is significant and kind of cover, what the laws are saying.
That's great. Today is a big day for sellers, for the state of Louisiana, for facilitators, as Louisiana has finally announced and clarified as they've established this economic nexus and this marketplace facilitator nexus law. And, effective July 1st, marketplace facilitators and remote sellers will be required to be registered if they exceed the threshold in Louisiana. And that threshold, both for economic nexus purposes and marketplace facilitator purposes, is $100,000 in total sales, or 200 or more separate transactions that are sold to the state or to customers who live in the state of Louisiana. So a big day. There's only now 4 states that remain that have yet to establish marketplace facilitator legislation: Florida, Kansas, Missouri, and Mississippi. So only 4 states left. It's just going to be a battle to see who's going to be the last one to close the door. And we expect, all the states to follow in the near future. But
yeah, it doesn't seem it would make sense that all states wouldn't do it because, I know all states are looking to capture as much of that sales tax revenue as possible.
Yeah.
And for them not to enact a law like this, it's very surprising to me.
Yeah, very surprising. When it first came out, this whole marketplace facilitator legislation a couple of years ago, we saw a couple of the states pursuing the state or the sellers directly. They would obtain a list of sellers from Amazon, and then they would go after the sellers specifically. But how that quickly turned to go right to Amazon and require Amazon to collect and to remit that tax on behalf of all the sellers. And so just 4 states left. That's right.
So I know that a lot of our listeners and a lot of people who reach out to me, they get online and they're always so confused as to, what a marketplace facilitator is and what a remote seller is. Because a lot of times, in the laws and how they're written, they're kind of written together. And so it seems like they're synonymous. And I was hoping you could kind of specify what a marketplace facilitator is and what a remote seller is, because I think a lot of the people who reach out to us, they're going to be remote sellers. So I'm hoping you can clarify the difference between the two.
Yeah, definitely. It is mighty confusing out there. You have some states who have established economic nexus or marketplace facilitator legislation, some states who have established economic nexus, and some of them, they coincide with each other, but some states, they are completely separate, meaning that they haven't passed both of them. The state doesn't necessarily need to establish both of them, but the big difference here is that a marketplace facilitator is a company that allows users to sell goods on its website. Simply enough, Amazon's a marketplace facilitator because individuals and other companies can sell goods through Amazon.com. It's important for sales tax purposes because it begs the question: who is responsible for collecting and remitting that sales tax to the state? The marketplace facilitator or the seller of the goods. And one would argue that, I'm not the seller of the goods. Amazon is the seller of the goods. And Amazon would argue the opposite. So the states have to establish this legislation in order to clarify. When it comes to a marketplace seller, they're an individual or a company that sells goods online using that third-party website, a marketplace facilitator. And then when you talk about a remote seller, that's going to be completely different or same as a marketplace seller. But a remote seller is merely somebody who doesn't have any physical presence in the state, and merely sells goods and ships them into the state via a common carrier. So if you're a marketplace seller, you could also be considered a remote seller because you don't have physical presence in the state. But if you use FBA, Fulfillment by Amazon, and Amazon's storing your inventory in that state, then you're no longer considered a remote seller because you have inventory in the state, you have physical presence. You're still considered a marketplace seller because you're using the marketplace facilitator, Amazon, to make those sales. But you're no longer considered a remote seller because you have physical presence. If you have independent contractors, if you make deliveries in your own vehicles, you're not considered a remote seller. You've got physical presence in the state. So it's important to make that distinction when determining, what am I? Am I a marketplace seller? Am I a remote seller? Am I a retailer? What am I in the state, and how does it apply to my business?
Yeah, I think it's a really good distinction when you're trying to figure out how you should get registered, if you should get registered in the state, because it's constantly changing. I know there's a lot of confusing tax laws out there, but do you have a case where that it is confusing, a common state where you're unsure of what the thresholds are and what your requirements are?
Yeah, one of the more confusing states, in my opinion, is a state like Mississippi that has established economic nexus. Kansas is another one that comes to mind. They have established economic nexus, but they haven't established marketplace facilitator legislation. So the economic nexus legislation in Mississippi says that if you have made sales of more than $250,000 in sales, total sales, then you've established economic nexus. So is the marketplace facilitator considered those who have made the sale, or is the marketplace seller or the seller themselves, considered to have made the sale? Unfortunately, Mississippi identified who is responsible in that instance, the facilitator or the seller, to make that distinction, who's responsible for the tax. And so our guidance, similar to others, is it rests on the seller, the individual seller, that company. As the invoice shows, it's from ABC company. They're selling to Bob, who lives in Mississippi, and they sold him a widget or a gadget of some sort, and so they're responsible for collecting the tax if they've established Nexus. But if Nexus hasn't been established, because that's where it all starts with Nexus. If Nexus hasn't been established, then they don't have a responsibility because the state can impose their sales tax law on that company, on the seller. Therefore, it's up to the consumer, the customer, to self-assess or emit use tax on that product because they purchased something that was taxable, but it wasn't taxed by the seller. So Mississippi is a tricky one.
Yeah. It's crazy to think back on how quickly all this has changed, because it's just 2 years ago when Wayfair went to the Wayfair case went to the Supreme Court. Now economic nexus was created essentially, and now here we are, like economic nexus thresholds for a lot of remote sellers are kind of being it doesn't apply to them, especially if they're selling on a marketplace facilitator. So it's getting, states are trying to make it easier and trying to specify what they're doing, but it's also making it very confusing at the same time.
Yeah, for sure.
Another question I had was, is there a case where if you meet a threshold in a state that you wouldn't have to get registered there?
Yeah, definitely. Let's stick with Mississippi. They've indicated that if you make sales of more than $250,000 in sales, then Mississippi's a bad example. If you make more than $250,000 in sales, then you may not need to register if all of those sales are exempt sales or wholesale sales. That's not the case with Mississippi. Mississippi clarified both of those, that it doesn't matter the type of sale made in the state. If you have made more than 250,000, then you're required to be registered. But if you were to look at a state like Tennessee, for example, Tennessee indicates that if you make more than $500,000 is their threshold. So if you exceed $500,000 in total sales, then you're required to be registered. However, there's a caveat in there that if your sales are for wholesale, they're made for resale to other retailers, then the wholesale sales are not considered to be part of that calculation when determining if you've established economic nexus. So you may be a distributor out there that sells both to retailers and to the end user. And so when determining if you've established economic nexus in Tennessee, you want to exclude those sales that you made to other retailers for wholesale, because it's not in the calculation to determine if you've established economic nexus in that state. So it differs by state. Mississippi, right. It doesn't matter if they're exempt sales, if they're wholesale sales, if they're retail sales. Well, it doesn't matter the type of sale. Mississippi says all sales. Tennessee says you can exclude the wholesale sales, but you have to include the exempt sales. So there's a difference between wholesale and exempt sales. And so you got to watch that one when determining if you have a nexus. So it's a crazy world out there, and it differs by state, and it can be overwhelming, but thankfully, we're here at Pizer Johnson to assist and help, give you that peace of mind that you need in determining, have I established nexus? Do I need to register? Can I deregister? Taking a look at your overall footprint and getting an understanding for what your thresholds are and where your liability is or isn't, where you can afford to take a risk in deregistering, or if there is no risk in deregistering. So that's quite complex, but that's where we are.
But that's why it pays to, talk to those who are in the know, because, businesses, we may assume like they're in their own state and they're also selling online, like, well, I meet the thresholds.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get registered everywhere. So they may meet a threshold, just kind of like, okay, $100,000, 200 transactions. Yeah, I meet that threshold in 15 states. I might as well just get registered in all of them.
Yeah.
And thinking that it's the same all over in all states. But even though the threshold's made it the same, the requirements or the definitions could be different.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like you said, peace of mind, we offer that what's next call or consultation where you can ask your questions and really get a good peace of mind in where you should get registered or deregistered. You may be registered in too many states. So yeah, really good there. One last question. What do we have coming into the future when it comes to marketplace facilitator tax laws? Do we know of any specific dates of when laws are coming into play?
Yes. The other states, so there were 6 states that hadn't passed economic and marketplace facilitator legislation. Louisiana, like I said, mentioned it today, made it official. It'll go into effect July 1st. But the other state is Tennessee, that has announced recently that their legislation will go into effect October 1st. So they've established marketplace facilitator legislation. They've established economic nexus legislation that will go into effect October 1st. And their threshold is $500,000 in total sales. Again, Tennessee, they consider wholesale sales to be excluded from that calculation when determining if you've established economic nexus, but the exempt sales to be included in that calculation. If you're a service provider and you provide non-taxable service to the state of Tennessee, then you can exclude that as well. But there's some different caveats there. But October 1st is the go live date for Tennessee, and they will require marketplace facilitators to start collecting and remitting to Tennessee at that time. Amazon has yet to confirm that I've seen that they will be collecting and remitting on behalf of all the sellers, but we anticipate that they will in due time. So Tennessee is on the way.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for your time. And again, if you guys are looking into getting registered or deregistered, there's a link down below to be able to schedule your free What's Next call. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact us through email. You can find our email on our website, and there's a lot more content for you to see, even on this, on our podcast. So go ahead and scroll through those episodes and see what could help you the most. All right, Paul. Hope to see you on another one.
Thanks, Ryan. It's been great to be here, and hopefully that's helpful information to our listeners out there.